Many of us dream of owning a classic car, a prospect only made more exciting if you fix and maintain it yourself. But running a classic car is a very different experience from a modern one. So Andrew Evanson, Senior Operations Manager at Lancaster Insurance, visited Ralph Hosier Engineering Limited to get some beginner's advice from the mechanical maestro himself, Ralph Hosier. He also brought his son Frankie to pass that passion for classics down the generations. It doesn't matter how fast or slowly you drive, you'll always need brakes effective enough to pull you up safely. So how do you ensure that your brakes can be relied on?
Now obviously brakes are really important, that goes without saying, but they're often very much neglected. And one of the things that can happen, particularly if you've got a classic car that doesn't get used very much, is they can actually start rusting up on your driveway. Where the brake pads are, that won't go quite so rusty. So you'll have rusty bits and non-rusty bits. And then when you apply the brakes when you're driving, you'll get friction, less friction, and they'll start to judder quite badly. One of the things you're looking for is general rust, a little bit of surface rust, wire brush that away. We also want to make sure there's no contamination on the disc. Any sort of oil or anything like that can give us a problem. So here's a new brake disc, and when we fit that, obviously handling it, you've got oil and stuff on your gloves and stuff, you'll end up with oil on the surface of the brake disc. So when we fit a new brake disc, what brake cleaner does is it evaporates away and doesn't leave any residue behind. So we'd apply a bit of that, wipe that clean, and then you've got a very clean surface. So we do that after we've fitted it. The other thing that can go wrong with the brakes is the brake calipers themselves. A brake caliper like this has got pistons in it with rubber seals on them. And over time, those seals can deteriorate. That seal not only stops the hydraulic fluid coming out, but it also, as the piston's applied, when you put your foot on the brake, that seal distorts slightly. And when you take your foot off the brake, that's what pulls the piston back in again to take the brakes off again. So it's got an important job to do. If it gets old and gummed up and it can't do that properly, then your brakes can stay on a little bit. There's another seal further out, which is a dirt seal to stop any sort of contamination getting onto that piston surface. If your calipers aren't working properly and they're either sticking on or when you put your foot on the brake, it doesn't do anything and then it suddenly comes on, it's probably the seals. Now you can take the pistons out, replace the seals. As long as the bores are clean and there's no rust on them, quite a lot of vehicles, you can buy refurbished calipers quite economically. The pads themselves, when you look at them, you've got a backing material, this piece of metal, and then the friction material on it, bonded on. And it's usually a mixture of little metallic particles in a sort of a resin. Now, when you buy brake pads, as with any safety critical thing, it's important to buy good quality items. Now, if you've got an older car that's got drum brakes on it, same principles apply. The drum's slightly different, that the friction material operates on the inside, pushing out. So we want to make sure that this surface is clean, not got any rust on it, and it hasn't worn out. The thickness is very, very important, so we need to measure that. When you're fitting the brakes, you want to make sure that they can move, the pads can move freely inside the calipers. So you want to make sure they can't stick on the side. So we use some anti-friction paste on the side of it. That surface there that bolts onto the hub has got to be completely clean, and so is the hub. So when you take the old brake disc off, it's worth just going over it with a sharp edge, scrape that hub clear. Because if there's a tiny piece of dirt, when you fit new discs and pads, to start off with, it works. But what the disc is doing is it's actually wobbling like that as you drive down the road. And the pistons in the caliper are doing that. The high spots on either side will get worn down first. And eventually, after about 2,000 miles, the brake disc will have thick bits and thin bits. And then you'll get really bad brake judder. The other thing that's a vital component on your braking system is the brake fluid. Brake fluid should be renewed every 3 years, depending on use. Brakes work by turning all the energy your car's got into heat. If you've ever seen race cars, you'll see the brakes glowing bright red. So not only do the brake pads have to be good enough to the job, but the brake fluid just behind them has to be spot on. When it gets water in it, that water boils, obviously above 100 degrees C. And what that means is that part of the brake fluid has turned into a gas. So instead of compressing hydraulic fluid, you're now compressing gas, and the pedal goes really, really soft. And there are a lot of different grades of brake fluid. We often refer to it by the American standard. DOT3 and DOT4 is very common. DOT5 is only for silicon-based brake fluids. Silicon brake fluid isn't hygroscopic, but moisture still gets into the system. The DOT numbers don't just mean how good the brake fluid is. They refer to things like shelf life, its boiling temperature, its compressibility, all sorts of different things. So a lot of race cars will use a DOT3 racing brake fluid, which only lasts for 6 months because it's so hygroscopic, but it will work at really high temperatures you get on race cars. And different fluids have different compressibilities. And if you use the wrong fluid, particularly with ABS systems, the ABS system will get really out of shape. When it's switching valves on and off and expecting the brake calipers to move at a certain time, if the brake fluid's too spongy, that timing goes out and the ABS system starts getting very unhappy. When you're in the area looking at the brakes, also look at all the brake pipes, all the flexible hoses. They're usually reinforced rubber, and rubber perishes over time, so that can give you a problem. You don't want to get to a situation where your brake pipes are starting getting brittle, because they'll work and work and work, and then when you do an emergency stop, you put high pressure in it, and that's when it fails. So look at the brake pipes. If there's any sign of cracking or perishing on the pipe, renew it. So whenever you open the hydraulics of the system by replacing a pipe, you want to minimise the amount of air that gets in there, clamping off pipes where appropriate, or just making sure you do the job as quickly as possible.
So, make sure the calipers are moving freely and correctly, monitor the thickness and shape of your pads and discs, regularly change your brake fluid, and make sure that all your hoses are in good condition. Do all that and you'll have brakes that can be relied on, no matter what you're driving or how quickly it's going.
Pheasant. The brakes are really good.